Am I there? Oops, that's it. Thank you very much. Just very briefly, the background to India 800 is really around social justice and globalization. A recognition that in today's society, there are three things that really drive and govern the changes that are taking place. One is the speed at which I think science and technology is developing and what it's making progress in terms of countries' developments across the globe. Number two, particularly the way finance and capital has moved across. Whatever our views on the failures of business and the finance world over the last couple of years, the fact is that that has been a key trigger in the way that globalization has actually operated. But number three, we've actually begun to live in a much more smaller world. A concept of social justice that is UK-based alone is no longer valid. A lot of national governments depend on policies made either in the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, G7, G20, I could name you a whole host of other organizations. So there's a bigger agenda that is developing, that is beginning to impact the way our little world is actually run. And that world is becoming very, very small. And I'll give you some examples of actually how small it has become. So that is the background to why science and technology forms a key cornerstone of India 800 Foundation's work that we do. I'm fascinated by the second bullet point, which is the idea of progress. The idea of progress really is originally concept 17th century Enlightenment thinkers who believed that in order for society to progress, you really had to challenge society. You were constantly looking at business, industry, science, literature, arts, music, that would develop the human spirit, that would develop the economy, that would develop nation states. That idea of enlightenment was captured quite well by a Hungarian poet, Indri Marek, in which he goes on to explain how positive this idea of progress has been in developing new challenges for nations enabled to measure their progress. I've always been fascinated by the concept that if the idea of progress is such a powerful motivator for nation states and for societies because we want to measure our progress, then I actually find, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, a great deal of mistrust and complacency around this idea of progress. I find the rich world impoverished with this concept of the idea of progress. And in countries where I've worked and with this foundation, both in India, Philippines, and Africa, I promise you one thing, there is a great fire in their belly for change. Even the most poorest of the poor don't want welfare. What they actually want is access to means to be able to change their lives. And that mission of the idea of progress is a very, very powerful one for, I think, governments and societies to harness to get the kind of outcomes that we want. So the idea of progress for me is quite a central theme in the development of India 800 Foundation. But the next stage, really 2.5 years ago, when I was told, Krishna, I think we have something small for you to do. And that is something about going to India and putting together India 800, was really to build an evidence base and to understand the scale of the problem. A lot of the speakers have made a reference to how complicated, how difficult India is. And let me tell you, in having traveled extensively in some of the most difficult parts of India, having spoken to numerous people in different villages and cities about the problems and the issues, it is incredibly complex. I can give you huge examples, some you may be aware of incredibly good intentions, a huge amount of investment gone in for change, but with some very poor outcomes for some hilarious reasons. And I'm happy to share some of those anecdotes with you. But the first principle, therefore, for me, was really about understanding what some of those problems are and building the evidence base from which we could operate. And the next point about the database of NGOs, have a guess how many non-governmental organizations actually operate in India today? Anybody wants to give me a figure? Okay, estimates vary from 1.5 million to 2 million. Nobody knows the exact number. Okay. But there's a very large number of NGOs working in India on a host of issues. And to try and pinpoint who does what, where, how effectively, is really an incredible challenge. And what we have started to do in India800 is to actually build that evidence base. We've started to identify NGOs and partners that are incredibly good at doing what they do. They're good because they understand the issues. They're good because they're very close to the people that matter the most. They may have difficulties on governance. They may be difficult in finance and management as to what we would regard in the West as good philanthropic practices. But the reality is, in terms of delivering the outcomes, they are exceptional. So we have a large evidence base of those NGOs today. And that evidence can be very useful in shaping, informing, influencing who we work with, where we work, and how we take those issues forward. The last point on the first slide is really the challenge of inclusive growth, the challenge that the Minister referred to. One of the biggest challenges for me in coming to understand inclusive growth is really reading an incredibly large number of very tiring academic textbooks on inclusive growth. Having long discussions with the World Bank India office, having long discussions with IMF, having looked at some very tedious minutes of the G20 to understand how the finance ministers have been operating and what they think inclusive growth is. I tell you the conclusion I came at, and you might say to me, Krishna, we could have told you this without all this hard bloody work. The fact is, nobody, in my view, actually knows how to achieve inclusive growth. We are all very desirous of the fact that we want inclusive growth. We recognize that industry and economics and the development will actually uplift the country. Those that believe in a trickle-down theory, yes, benefits will trickle down. Those that think, well, forget it, the crumbs ain't going to fall down here, it's going to take too long to reach, have a different model. But the challenge remains, not just for India, it remains for Brazil, Russia, China, what are commonly called BRIC countries. And it's really important, if we do not wish to see further civil unrest, like we have in parts of India and some of the easterly states where we operate, we have to find models of inclusive growth. And I'm really pleased to give you one quick example of how we see inclusive growth going forward. Mining and mining industry are a huge example. Those of you who know Vedanta and the difficulties and the Church of England withdrawing its pension fund from Vedanta will actually understand some of the politics on mining. Huge issue and tension between wanting to extract mineral ore from the earth, having to displace communities that live there, yet the necessity to develop the country. Because without that wealth coming out, you will not be able to develop the country. You have landscapes which are rich in resources, but people that are incredibly cash poor. But that land provides them a living. And if you take away that land and you start digging your mining operations and all the wealth is taken out, quite rightly communities feel deprived, frustrated, left out. Incredibly good example of working in partnership, as our chairman said, with the government. There is a draft bill currently before the Indian Parliament on mining. And I tell you, if that bill can be implemented correctly, it is going to be a major breakthrough. That bill lays three key important principles very quickly. One is that anybody who gets a mining lease in India will actually have to put 26% of your profits into a specific fund to help those communities that live on that land. But here is something exceptionally good, that those mining companies, in addition to the 26%, will give one share, pro rata, to the head woman of each household that lives in that area with voting rights. Okay? And the local areas will form a national sustainable framework through which mining companies and communities can come together and decide how that money is going to be spent and where it will be applied. And I think it's an incredibly good model of inclusive growth. where you're balancing the need for the nation state to dig its resources, make things happen, and to enable local people live there. The challenge, of course, is delivery. And we'll wait to see that. But the intentions are there. And that's another example of what we mean by inclusive growth. Take you quickly to my next slide. There's a huge debate when I talk about India and development. They say to me, Krishna, but India does not need aid. Why does India need aid? It has got 8-9% growth rate. Well, let me just deal with that issue very quickly. We have a population of 1.2 billion, of which 48.2% are women, right? Nearly just about 50%, and 70% actually live within the rural world, and only 30% are in urban. We have growth rates of 7 to 9%, creating affluence and social mobility. India today has the second largest numbers of mobile subscribers, 886 million of them. Second largest after China. And this is 2010 data. When 2011 data comes up, I would not be surprised if India became number one. And I can tell you this shouldn't surprise some of you. There are more mobile phones than toilets in India. Okay? There are more mobile phones than there are books for children in India. There are more mobile phones than there is clean drinking water in India. Okay? But these mobile phones also provide a huge solution in terms of how mobile technology can be used to deliver some really exciting pioneering work, and I will touch on that. The fourth bullet point is really quite interesting. Capgemini and Merrill Lynch produce an annual report about how rich people are getting and where they are becoming rich. They call it a high net worth individual population. And in India's case, the population rose by 26,000 to 153,000. A bit more on this particular point is in the brochure on India 800 that you'll pick up when you leave from here. So I will not expand on that particular point here. But the point I'm trying to make is that there's actually been a 20.3% millionaire growth rate against a world average of 8.3. So clearly, the 8-9% growth rate is shifting up. Big things are happening. People are making money. Society is actually changing. And in addition to that, the recognition of greater role for women to play in the development process. Positive stuff there. One other thing on that last slide, which you should also know. India today spends more money on aid, its own money on aid, than it actually receives. Okay, it has a huge number of schemes. At the last count, we counted 482 different schemes that are being run for people in poverty or people who suffer from ill health. Okay, so there's a huge amount of investment that's already going in by the government. And we'll talk about what kind of impact it is having or what the issues are there. Let's talk about the challenges very quickly. It's ranked 119 out of 169 countries on human development. And here I think is the most shameful bit. It's not just for India, this is across the world, but this statistic is for India. 2 people die every 3 minutes due to TB. Okay? This particular bacteria is the most wicked and the most difficult one to eradicate. Huge number of scientists and money has been applied to it to try and deal with this. In addition, if you get TB, you have HIV, you have diabetes, you're in serious trouble. You're creating a workforce that can only give you 60 to 70% of their energy. They can't give you more than that. I have seen communities destroyed completely with the high rates of TB infections. And when we come on to my partners, I will talk about that with some of them from the back. Look at the fifth one. There are only 5 states in India, but 50% of those villages, which account for 80% of malnutrition cases. We know where the problem is. We have huge problems about where the problem is because of civil unrest at times, because of security issues, because of difficulties. These are areas, it takes you 9 hours to get access to travel into these areas. When you get there, there is no guarantee what you will get in terms of the local communities and your capacity to work with them. So it calls for tremendous resilience and perseverance to work in some of those areas that we're describing to you. The estimates of those living on $2 a day vary again from 450 to 800 million. And this is the thing about stats and data, lies, damn lies, and even more lies. Depending on how you want to play it, you decide to play it. Across the world, and this is really important because of the consequence. Across the world, we have today 1.1 billion people that defecate in the open. 58% of them are Indians. The consequences of that on drinking water, infections, public health are incredibly huge. And how come we've still not been able to meet a very basic need in terms of public health agenda? Okay, so that is something that really you need to bear in mind. And again, one of the other bigger challenges, in my view, is to involve more women as drivers of social change. And there are numerous examples from other agencies and our own that we've seen. You bring empowerment, you bring money, men, particularly men in villages and towns, very quick. A lot of that money is going to disappear either into gambling, into alcohol, into different places. And what men do with money is a well-known fact. You give money to women, incredible investment in their children, in education, in the development of the family and livelihood. Where women have become the chairs of the local Gram Panchayat, i.e. the local village organizing committee. What is interesting, the first thing that women want, we don't want to walk 6 miles to get clean water, dig a few more wells here, that's what we want. When men take that position, what do we want? We want more roads. We'd like a dhaba, an alcohol drinking place and an eating place to open up. Really interesting dimensions in a very complex world about how different gender issues come into play, what development means to them and how they want to run with it. That is the background and some of the challenges I want to share with you. It is not to say that 8 to 9% growth means India has enough money, don't give it aid. Aid, I think, is not the issue. The issue is the challenge of inclusive growth, how you bring investment in that is tailored to actually understand what will work, why it will work, and how it will work. Without that, I'm afraid it is not going to be sustainable. And what you've heard from colleagues on the panel this afternoon is really about sustainability, it's about social innovation, and I'll talk about some of the work that we're doing on that. But in Building One India, we chose 4 areas we're going to work on: health, non-conventional energy, economic integration, agriculture, and food security. Let me tell you where we've got to very quickly. India800 Foundation today sits in the middle up there. I have an incredible organization. I have a lot of time, energy for them. Sangani and Sangani Mitra. You really want to see exploitation of women? I suggest you come and visit that. Today, it is still the world's largest brothel in an area called Kamitipura in Mumbai. If you really believe in what human beings can do to other human beings, that is the place. Diane Cross at the back, can you please stand up? Thank you. Diane at the back heads that organization. Sangani and Sangani Mitra, she's one of our key strategic partners. Thank you very much, Diane. Diane and her colleagues actually pioneered the very first sex workers bank. We have what I cheekily describe as human ATMs. These human ATMs that walk into those brothels, they will deal with pimps, they will deal with smugglers in sex trafficking, they will collect cash as small as 5 rupees to as much as 500 rupees, depending how bad or good the night has been before. Okay. But 2 things we manage to do. We provide a very safe home for the money for these women. And what that safety has enabled them to do is actually invest in their children's education. It's enabled us to access health programs to them. And it's actually enabled the women to be incredibly powerful and confident to the extent that what we would typically call matrons, we call them garwalis in India, are actually now encouraging the girls that they run to say, you should save. You should save for your future. One day you need to be out of this business. Okay? And that really is about going back to what I've said earlier, our intention to go for the root causes, not the good causes. We have to find the key that can open the door, that can address where the problem is. And in doing that, it is difficult, it is slow, it is painful, it is frustrating, but if we persevere, we get incredibly, very, very good results. And anytime you travel, if you're in Mumbai, please, 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 do go and visit Sangani and Sangani Mitra. It's an incredible organization that's working. What we have decided to do, because of the changes and investment that is needed, India800 has taken out Sangani Mitra in terms of shareholding, and we actually now own the Sex Workers Bank, so that we can bring in the level of investment and the new technology that is needed to enable them to get to the second stage. And I will tell you, this is a story to watch. Okay, it is going to be an incredibly exciting piece of work about how we empower people with very small sums of money to change their lives. The next round circle really is about Truncated Foundation. Again, an incredibly great foundation. We talked about wealth, we talk about poverty. One of the consequences of wealth is all the diseases that we are familiar with in the West here. From diabetes, kidney disease, arthritis, all those numbers are rising. Lifestyles are changing, people are doing less with more, as it were. My next slide is on strategic delivery partners. What I'd like to do is very quickly tell you who they are, where they're from. Unfortunately, my colleagues from Sundarbans didn't get a visa to come here. But really, if any of you know where the Sundarbans is, you're on the edge of existence. West Bengal, the tide rises, you get washed away. You go out to catch a few fish, the tiger will eat you. And tigers seem to like men for some reason, I don't know why, but maybe they taste better. But it is an incredibly difficult terrain to live in. So Sundarbans, the colleagues from Sundarban Social Development Centre couldn't attend. The Pune Science Park is one of our key technology partners. I have Dr. Rajendra Jagdale. Dr. Jagdale, thank you so much. Dr. Jagdale drives a lot of the technology that we're looking for, the search that we're doing both on e-technology, health-related technologies, mobile technologies. He enables us to do that and make sure that we're doing it correctly. We have BIAF, incredible agricultural foundation. Dr.